So I wanted to start by talking about sort of the intersection between storytelling and activism. And, you know, I think for a lot of people like myself, I mean, I come from a marketing background, and there are a lot of marketers out there who want to make a difference, but what happens is they sort of act in a vacuum. And the one thing that was interesting about the work that we were able to do here was we were able to coordinate with legislation as it was happening, connect with senators, community organizers. The timing was right, and when our work hit, it was able to make a difference because so much other work had already been done, right? So I wondered, Mallory, if you could kind of talk about the importance of those kinds of coordinations between organizers and storytellers.
Yeah, so a little bit on my background. So I came into elected office. I ran for office for the first time in 2018, flipped a district from one party to another. But I came from a background that included car design, toy design, media, advertising. And getting into politics and policy, you realize very quickly that a lot of those skills often aren't found in this work. And even when people ask me what I do, there's a little bit of a negative connotation when it's, oh, I'm a politician, you know, kind of hide from it. But what's really exciting about this work and storytelling and how you are able to get into it is, I think, especially those of us in younger generations, we want to do something good with our career. We want to get in and make a difference. We want to help leave this place a little bit better than we found it. And you don't have to do what I did and completely change careers and run for office. You can step into this work and help move policy in a way that is really effective, because oftentimes we as legislators are presented with data, facts, research, and that doesn't move people. It doesn't connect with you emotionally. In Michigan, we have been trying to repeal the tampon tax for 8 years. And I even get pushback from people. I've been working on this legislation for 3.5 years since I got into office. This has been my bill that we've tried to push year after year after year. And a lot of people don't understand, how could something so simple take that long? But it's not just about the legislation. It's about, how do you tell a story? How do you build consensus? How do you connect with people? The reality in a lot of legislatures is most of the people serving in those positions are older white men. How do you connect with somebody who's a decision maker to get them to A, understand the issue, realize that it is an issue and a priority, and push it across the line? So it's a lot of this work takes time. And whoever controls the cultural narrative, the story narrative, and gets into kind of the zeitgeist in a way that marketers know how to do really well is going to move policy. So it's something that I'm excited that Lafayette American took on. I think everybody here in your work, if you're a creative, you can step in and do this work and help move policy and make a real difference that is gonna leave it a little bit better for half of the population now in Michigan who no longer has to pay an unfair tax.
Yeah, and just to build on that, actually, so the senator talked about narrative, right? We've seen how a negative narrative has been pushed in our policy across the country for however many years now, and due to that, we're seeing specific pieces of legislation being introduced, you know, whether here, whether in Florida, whether in Texas, Ohio, wherever it may be, that are negatively impacting folks. Now, something that we're seeing is incredibly important is that power of storytelling, right? Good storytelling, or I should say good marketing campaigns, are gonna always be telling a story, right? And a good story is gonna make someone feel something, right? It's gonna elicit some type of emotion. Now that's the emotion that we wanna be able to harness so that people can take action, right? It's that emotion, right? How are we gonna connect with folks on a specific level that they're gonna feel something that's gonna make them wanna go out and make a change? And so when we connect with groups like Lafayette American, who are able to bring that together and bridge the gap between creative, between storytelling, policy, and activism, we're gonna have strong, impactful results that are gonna lead to really strong pieces of legislation, like the senator was saying, that we're gonna be able to pass and really change folks' lives with.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like being a student organizer and how you are able to sort of pull people together and bring them into the story?
Of course. First and foremost, I do want to name that the skill of storytelling is a very specific niche, and not all youth have it. So one example that the senator gave early this week was, they came to her and gave all these facts. And facts are great, but you have to incorporate it into that skill. And I think a lot of us my generation doesn't have, it's not that we don't want it, but I've been very fortunate to have mentors and sponsors who took me to media trainings or sat down with me and helped me cultivate my story. So that's one of the important things with Lafayette America partnering with Period, is because it gave that skill to youth activists and youth organizers, which is huge because you don't see people like me with my age sitting on panels like this or talking about this work. And none of this would have been possible if we didn't have the partnerships with creative agencies, because it's taken the message, which is youth-powered and youth-centered, and we've been doing the work this entire time, but no one would know if creative agencies, people in positions of power didn't uplift it.
And I think it's actually interesting to celebrate that work too. So I first became aware of this issue in France because I saw a campaign out of Germany win an award where they had a similar taxation, unfair tax equity, or how would you, what's the phrase we use for it? It's
a sexist tax.
Sexist tax. They had the same sexist tax in Germany. And they did this great creative work, which kind of turned on the light bulb for me, right? It wasn't the issue, it was the creativity around the issue that attracted me to it, so the story. And, even just this week, there was 72 and Sunny is a shop that does great work, and they got national press for this campaign, Loopholes, which was a wonderful idea of putting, just like the toy in the cereal, they put feminine hygiene products in the cereal because it doesn't get taxed, right? Because you can buy it with food stamps, you can buy it, with the programs that aren't able to be applied to feminine hygiene products on their own. I love that story, and suddenly I was aware of this new wrinkle, right? That kind of dimensionalized it in a way where I'm like, why the fuck is that happening, So putting that story out there in a way, getting people aware of it at the right time. This is when the national legislation is up that actually could affect it. And it isn't working in a vacuum, and that coordination is really what organizing is all about, And I think it's really just making the organizers aware that there are people like us, this agency, 72 and Sunny, other agencies out there who want to help, and we need to build some kind of coordination to connect you guys to those storytellers at the right time.
Go ahead.
I also think, there's something really important about the conversation about, we see this in organizing, in activist communities, where when it's your issue that you live with every single day, sometimes it can be really frustrating even to realize that there's a lot of people who don't recognize that that's an issue. It can be hard to get out of that mindset, and I work with organizers all the time where it feels like you're screaming into the void because this is an issue. You know that it affects you, your friends, your loved ones, but there's a lot of people who don't even see it. So something that really stuck with me when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, and really examining her life body of work, recognizing that when she started at the ACLU, she was presented with all of these cases about gender discrimination against women, which we all know there is gender discrimination against women. But the first case she took up and argued to the Supreme Court was a case of gender discrimination against men. So it was a case about in a state where women could buy beer at the age of 18, but men couldn't buy beer until the age of 21 because men were perceived as being irresponsible and more rowdy, and women were more responsible and could buy beer. So this case was argued up to the Supreme Court, and when you listen to her talk about it, I went to see her speak at Notre Dame, my alma mater, years ago. What was brilliant about that was understanding that all of the Supreme Court justices are older white men. They are not going to understand or care if there's gender discrimination against women, because we all bring our own lived experience into spaces. If you can't connect with something through that lens, you're not going to see that it's an issue at all. So that case was the first time in history where discrimination on the basis of sex was codified into law. And that became the opening, that's the door, where now we can argue that gender discrimination on the basis of sex that negatively impacts women is a real issue. But it took a case with a man to do that. So that's the power of storytelling and really kind of it's hard to take a step out of your own lived experience and put yourself in the shoes of the person you need to convince. It's the same thing as selling a product. You got to tell a story to make somebody swipe that credit card. If you're trying to move policy, you got to tell a story to make somebody press the button or put the bill up for the vote or whatever it is. And that's, I think, that the power of this connection is how can we help organizers, people who are living every single day with these issues, to step out a little bit and empower you guys to be able to look at somebody who does not fundamentally understand this issue and make them take the action that we know they need to take.
Yeah, and you know, I will say, you know, you talking about that really brings up the thought of the importance of understanding your audience, right? And so when you have partnerships with creative agencies, with marketing agencies, you have this different perspective as an organizer, as an activist, because as organizers and as activists, it's an emotional process that you go through every day, you know, trying to convince people that this is a human rights issue, trying to get people to care. And so you're just shouting into the void, like the senator's saying, every single day. You're going out and you're screaming, and people are looking at you like, what is wrong with this crazy person? What is going on here? They don't understand what's going on, what's happening. And so by understanding your audience, we're better able to tailor the messaging, right? Tailoring messaging is incredibly important here because the way I speak with a menstrual equity activist, the way I speak with someone who's been in the menstrual equity space for the last 10 years is going to be completely different than the way I'm speaking with someone who's never heard about period poverty, who doesn't understand the space, right? And so even, you know, when you look at different political parties, if I'm going to speak to a more liberal candidate, a more liberal legislator, I'm going to use specific language, different types of language than I would with a more conservative one, right? And, you know, we've seen that when we work with legislators in different states across the country. When we work with legislators in Texas, completely different language that we help them input into pieces of legislation to forward menstrual equity than we would in California, for example, right? You look at the two bills, they do the exact same thing. But if you read them, you feel like they're totally different because of the language differences, right? But it's not about saying what you want to say. It's about reaching the goal that we need to reach, and that's, you know, ending period poverty and furthering menstrual equity.
Amber, when you're working with students, do you find that they are looking for story, or do you find that they are finding their own voice and telling their own story?
A little of both. So just to note, I attend a conservative institution. Like I said, I attend an HBCU, so 95% of the students that I go to school with look like me and identify as Black. So this is like my first safe space where I don't have to worry about racism or stuff like that. But my school is extremely conservative. So when I'm having the conversation around menstrual equity, the students get it. We're here for it. We're with the rah-rah. We're going up with our picket fence. We're going for it. But then I have rules at my institution that say, well, if you want to do a protest, you have to get it pre-approved 2 weeks ahead of time. So then that doesn't make sense because if, for example, if something were happening tomorrow on Capitol Hill, I couldn't organize around it till 2 weeks later. And then also, my university president, God bless his heart, he's serving his 45th year as the university president. He's like, I think the second longest serving university president in the nation. And he's very much so 45 years behind, but even now we're watching these conservative leaders changing the narrative. So 4 years ago, when I first started my menstrual equity work on campus, I would not have gotten the time of day. Now I'm using my privilege as student body vice president, and I'm going up to him and I'm saying, you know, we really should have a pantry on campus. What if we name it after you? And he was just like, oh, that's really good. I like that. So he gave us $10,000, and now by the end of the year,
ego stroking.
Yep. Now by the end of the year, we're going to have a pantry on campus that provides free food, free resources to students, and that's amazing. So I think that's also very powerful that even traditionally conservative spaces are getting with the times and changing the narrative. So that's one thing I urge a lot of creative agencies. Hop on the bus now. This movement is not new. It's been happening for years. And if you don't get on now, you're going to be playing the catch-up game. That's not this. This movement has been happening for years. It's been run by the youth. And that's why we need creative agencies to amplify this work, because it's taking it to the next level. This work has been happening, but we're reaching more audiences than, excuse me. Period. Everyone who follows us knows what we're doing. This isn't a new issue. But when we work with influencers, people empower creative agencies, we're reaching an entirely new audience that just may not even known, or they may have normalized period poverty because they thought this is just something I'm going to have to deal with. So that's the power of working with creative agencies and youth organizers.
I think that's actually the fun part of this work is taking sort of invisible stories and making them visible. And I think that that's always a great creative challenge for any marketing team, any storytellers. So knocking on doors and saying, hey, there's this issue. There are some, and I don't want to call it taboo subjects, but subjects that people aren't every day used to talking about or comfortable talking about, and saying, let's talk about it. You'll find that creatives really respond to that. They're like, oh, the reason that these things are so kind of effective and pointy, the reason that an outdoor board that says, taxes on our periods are sexist kind of packs a punch is that people are like, whoa, you're talking about this. That kind of impact is everything that creatives live for. So in an interesting way, like the more, not to say the more taboo it is, but the more uncomfortable it is, the more you guys should be, as a community organizers, excited about reaching out to creatives, because creatives thrive with discomfort, right? Because that's the stuff that gets noticed.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So when we met this past week to talk about coming here and telling the story, I think the power of a story, and an example that I shared. So in Michigan, last year, the Oxford High School shooting happened just a few months ago. Horrific. Everything about it was horrific. And we had student organizers from March for Our Lives come to our state capitol a few weeks ago to advocate for expanded mental health support in schools, and to advocate for secure gun storage laws, where if you own a gun and there's a minor present in the household, that you are legally required to secure that gun so that somebody cannot access it who does not actually own that gun. And the students were, these are 14, 15, 16-year-olds who have just gone through and are still grappling with the fact that their lives are never going to be the same. They lost their friends, they lost loved ones, and the bravery to come in with fact sheets, with a script that they had put together, with all these things that they were asking for, with the research, with data about how impactful this legislation is in other states. But it took me asking one of the students, just kind of very openly, just how are you? Oxford recently invited students back to school for the first time since the shooting. And you could tell she wanted to tell me that she's okay. And she paused and she started crying. And she says, it's horrible. It's awful. I go into that building every day. I can still hear the gunshots. I still hear screaming. And it's so bad that I've gone back to virtual school. I can't go in the building. And to me, I don't care who you are. When you hear that story, you're going to be moved by it. So knowing how the legislature works, we can be presented with facts and data and research all day long, but it's a story or anecdata, that I like to refer to it, that is going to move somebody, especially somebody who fundamentally disagrees with what you're trying to do. But if you hear somebody tell you they can't go back to school, you're going to be moved by that. So I helped get her in front of multiple news cameras and tell that story, because we might not be able to today change the hearts and minds of the legislators who are currently in office, but we can work to change public opinion. And if she is telling that story to the public, then that's people who vote. That is people who are going to be looking at the ballot this year in August and November and selecting who we get in office, and we start to change the narrative and who is able to make these decisions. And it is one story at a time.
Yeah, oh, thanks for noticing. No, so, I just wanted to touch on actually the work that was being done in Michigan around period poverty. So, like the senator was saying, this is a bill that was being introduced for years, right? It's, introduced, failed, and at Period, along with our coalition partners, a lot of the work we did was, the organizing, bringing activists together, calling legislators' offices, annoying folks like you until they listen to us, and just getting their attention, and it only got us so far, right? But it was when we partnered with Lafayette American, they brought something incredibly important, which was visibility and creativity, right? Those two things. They brought those two things, and they created these huge billboards that they put around the city that said, "Periods are sexist." I don't know if we have a photo of it, but, they put these billboards up, and what that did is it attracted folks' attention. And by attracting folks' attention, what we were able to do is educate them on the issue of period poverty. And something we know for sure is when folks are educated on the issue of period poverty, they are overwhelmingly in support of menstrual equity. And so by doing that, we're able to push the needle forward, right? And so that just speaks to, bridging the gap between creative and policy change and activism.
I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, you should clap for that.
I like that point. But there's an interesting chain of events there where you can't start just with education, because if facts worked, we'd all have gotten straight A's all the time through school. If all you needed to see the facts. It's in our DNA as human beings that we need story. We need framing. We need something that holds our attention and pulls us in. And if you do that in a way that engages people, that opens their eyes, then they get the facts. Then they get the story. They want to know more, right? So it's like you need a musical like Hamilton to suddenly make everybody care about American history, But you need the lyrics, you need the songs, you need the great acting, et cetera. So I think that there's something really fundamental that we need as organizers to stay awake to, the point that Mallory was making. What is that framing? What is that way to tell this story that suddenly is going to get everyone go, oh, I have to know more. I have to learn more.
Well, with this, the tipping point in Michigan was, and organizers know this, it is all about momentum and building over time. It's not going to happen overnight. This is legislation almost a decade in the making that finally got signed into law. And understanding the dynamics in the legislature. We have a Democratic governor, Republican state House and state Senate. So as the momentum was building and the campaign launched at kind of the perfect time because we were almost there. But a lot of times, there's a lot of legislation that almost gets there that dies. And it was the perfect storm of organizing, activism, the work that Period is doing, the work that Lafayette did, for us to get the decision makers, the chairs, to realize, okay, this is an issue that we can put at the top of the agenda this year. There was a lawsuit that was filed in the state of Michigan against this tax, and it would have cost more for the state of Michigan to settle this lawsuit than just pass legislation into law, even knowing the revenue hit for the state, because that's always the argument is, well, if we remove the tax on this product, we lose revenue for the state. That's true. It's also true that there are a lot of girls who aren't even going to class because they can't access period products. And what does that mean long term for us? But it was the framing for us, and this was hard for me because I want to talk about the equity piece and what it means to young girls and families. But for a lot of my colleagues, it was, this is an unfair tax. This is a tax that half the population has to pay, that the other half does not, period. And then walk back. One of my colleagues said, never negotiate your way out of support of a bill. Like, if they're there, just stop talking.
Amber, when you're thinking about, issues that are out there that are related to this, what are the issues that you think don't have traction yet, that need to? What are the issues where you're like, we don't yet have that hook, but we need to because it's such an important issue?
I think anything reproductive health-wise is really big right now. Like I said, I run an emergency reproductive health hotline, and getting a plan B on campus is very difficult. When I go into my health center, they may say, do you want to pray on it? Do you want to come back tomorrow? Do you want to speak with a priest or a counselor? Which that's not the conversation we should be having. It should be, are you okay? And there are times when I'm doing this work that I deliver menstrual products at 5 a.m. in the morning, or I will leave my class to go deliver products to a student because someone will say, if you don't get here in 30 minutes, I can't go to class. And that's a very real thing. Like that's tragic. I'm a senior. I will be graduating on Mother's Day, and thank you. But I shouldn't have to leave my class to go help another student because their needs are not being met by their institutions, by the government, whatever. That's a real problem. So I would say anything reproductive health-wise, because we're not given that space to have that conversation.